Good. Well, hello, everybody. Nice to have you all here. Wow.
Hey
Great to be
guys.
here.
Hi guys. Yeah. I read your book today, and cover to
Thank
cover,
you.
and whizzed
Okay.
through it. Loved it. Very, very interesting. And
Good. Thank you.
woke up early, and I sort of said I need to do my homework and get into your thinking. So that was part of my due diligence. Somebody's asked for the title of John's book.
If you go, yeah, well, look, I'll type it in here. If you go to johnsanei.com/books, you will see all the books, but the free one is called Future Now, which is right on top. It's a free download. By the end of the week, there'll be the next version called Future How, which I am right now doing and finishing off with my publisher. So yeah, they're all available for everybody at this time of need.
So you're doing that at exponential speed also? You're writing your books at exponential speed.
Yeah, I have to be. Things are changing so quickly. I find that there's so much information, like you were saying, there's so much new information for us to digest.
Last week was a sobering moment for me because one of my friends from my early broadcasting days, Richard Coram, he passed away in the UK. 5 of my cousins and my relatives in Toronto, they have been tested positive. A friend of an associate and colleague of mine in Abu Dhabi, she got it and she has sort of found her way through, and she's one of the recoveries. It's getting into our inner circle, John, and I think that to me is a really important factor, because now we are in quarantine for about 5 weeks or so, and it's now seeping through, and we're getting into our circle, so we'll start feeling it more and more. Beyond that, I think we now have one common enemy. We'll talk about this a lot. And over 100 million scientists, epidemiologists, geneticists, doctors, physicians, and technologists, all of them are actually coming together at this one point in time to take on this particular singular enemy. And I think that's one of my key points we'll discuss later. The important thing at the moment is that our brains are wired differently. We think linear, we act linear, and the world is exponential. And this thing has put exponentiality onto steroids. And I think your analysis will start coming through from that. But what it does, it gets our amygdala going, and therefore our flight or fight mechanism is there. So fear clicks in, and therefore we end up looking at news all the time and social all the time, and then we're consuming a lot because our survival mechanism has somehow clicked in. And I think that is something we'll discuss today. Another one is that, with an exponential crisis, John, we need an exponential response. We really just can't work with just linear responses, incremental responses. And sadly, a lot of the things that I see online from consulting companies and individuals, they're just literally waiting for this thing to get over and back to normal. And we'll discuss that. Another issue which I encounter and I sort of feel is that there are 3 pandemics going on. There's a pandemic as the virus itself, there's a pandemic of fear, and there's a pandemic of isolation and loneliness. And I think that it creates another set of mental issues and stress and various other elements. A friend of mine, she called me yesterday, she said today is the 23rd day that I am absolutely alone in one place in Istanbul. So this kind of social isolation has a lot of issues there. And at this point in time, not only do we need an exponential sort of response to products and services and books and stuff, I think what we really need is exponential compassion and empathy and exponential humanity. I think that's what's going to pull us all together. And finally, I'd like to talk about trust, and a lot of those things are going to happen. And we're building trust networks and trust chains and how all of these elements coming together. So these are just some of the elements that my initial thoughts to sort of throw out there to the audience, to the listeners, to yourself. And I'll end my little preamble with one final thing, and the word change. I think we should throw the word change out of the window. And maybe we should call it bazinga or some South African word that you can think of. Because change as we understand it and as our brain processes it does not quite exist anymore. And I think the word is metamorphosis. I did a TEDx presentation and I spoke about metamorphosis. is that a little egg turns into a larva, turns and gets into its pupa, into the chrysalis. And when it gets into the chrysalis, it actually completely liquidizes itself and then comes out as this beautiful, blazing, colorful butterfly. But it actually changes form to become a new form. That's metamorphosis. And that really is the essence of where we are at this point in time, John. So now, ladies and gentlemen, introducing John to you. John is an author. He's an entrepreneur. He's a Singularity University faculty member, the first from Africa. He calls himself I think you call yourself a knowledge mercenary. I don't know what that means, but I dare say you'll explain that to us.
Sounds cool.
It sounds cool. It sounds cool. It sounds vicious. But anyway, so John is here. He's a celebrated author, fourth book, as you can see. John, really, really warm welcome to you. And you know, you're smiling away. It's lovely. Welcome. Over to you.
Thank you.
Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that intro. I think all your points are valid. I think metamorphosis is a wonderful way to look at what's happening. Just quickly on a side caveat, I was in Copenhagen with the Institute for Future Studies, and they said to me that they're tracking new jobs and new careers. And one of them is called a knowledge mercenary, somebody who travels the globe, picking up pieces of knowledge from cultures and different institutions, and then sharing them in order to be able to upgrade humanity. And I really enjoyed that I was fitting into one of their future work sectors that I didn't even know. So I started using that term. Just to go back a little bit on what you were saying, what I did describe in the book is this concept that Corona is hyper abstract until it's hyper local. It's happening as a disease to those people there until somebody you know has got it. And then it's a real, you gasp for air. And I know one person who's passed away. I know half a dozen people who have it. I have another few people that have already cured themselves from it. So I think we're all being affected by this very differently, but ultimately mortality is the question at play here. It's not just survival of business, is really deep down initially when it started, the fear of, do I have it? Can I get it? Will I die from it? And so I think that has really not been done. It's unprecedented. And also what we're seeing is the uncontrollable collapse of everyday life. Everything we knew is changing in one go. The way we do business, the way we structure our societies, the way we run our governments, the way we work, collaborate, spend, travel, and educate are all changing in one foul sweep. And I think that any other time that we had a black swan or a white swan, one or two sectors would kind of be impacted, and that's where the word change is good. But when we're going through something I'm calling a renaissance, we have to dissolve our old in order to create the new. And that dissolving of the old is painful. The dissolving of what you knew is difficult because you have to go through the process of mourning who you were in order to be able to become who you are. So this is an isolation that's not only taking us physically inwards, it's taking us emotionally inwards. And this is really why I wrote this book.
Yeah. You call this the COVID reset, don't you?
Yes.
You know, and basically creating and embracing the unknown and going out there. You talk about a lot of this change. I know a lot is changing, but has enough changed for us to be able to recognize this as a black swan event yet? Because I'm not so sure it has, because a lot of people are wait and see. We'll be back in 2 months. You know, it'll be fine, back to normal. What is normal and what is back to, why not forward to? So I don't think it's hit us yet. What do you think?
So I think two things. One, if we look at the spending habits of the people that came out of the war, they're called the baby boomers now, they were totally driven by safety and security. Yeah. And because every generation after that had this abundance of everything around them, they were driven by flexibility, creativity, ego, whatever the case was. I think ultimately what it's going to do first and foremost is change our spending habits. So that's a fundamental way of what we prioritize, what we want to spend on once this is done. Because the pain that people are living through are the people, the ones with the deepest pains are the ones who don't have any savings. Those are the people that are going to really shift the way they look at spending and mortgages and what they can afford based on the American dream of stretching yourself beyond what you can actually afford. The second thing is, Tariq, we are in the middle of this. I don't know, we're the first third, second third, middle. We need to let this finish before we can actually see the results and the domino effect of the bankruptcies. Because if we just look at one major retailer here in South Africa called Edgar's that has gone down, the ripple effect must be hundreds of companies, small to medium-sized businesses that have been affected by that. So I definitely think that the very fundamental of our human behavior is going to change, and the ripple effect we still haven't felt because we haven't finished it. We're right in the eye of the storm, so we have to wait for it to finish off.
Indeed, I actually work on a 3-month scenario. If this thing lasts for 3 months, I think not that much change will happen, and then we'll start going back again until the next crisis. A 6 to 9 month scenario, let's say by Christmas, if it's still there by Christmas, then companies will go under, banks will default, countries will default, then it starts changing. But if it goes on for 12 months or more, then we need to visualize ourselves and imagine ourselves completely differently. So how do we project ourselves into that, say, 12, 15 months from now, look back from there? Because your book shows a stepped process to get there.
Well, Tariq, I think that's a great question, but I want to pretend like I'm in this for 12 months. And if I use that energy as a catalyst to prepare, if I come back in 3, I'm winning. If I come back in 6, I'm winning. And so what I've done is I've totally re-envisioned how I can bring impact to the world, what value looks like, and how I can bring about more of it to the clients that used to pay me X, who don't have the cash flow anymore. How do I get many more clients to pay me Y so that I can still be able to add value and benefit from it? So for me, I've played with 3 and 6 and 12 month scenarios, and I've put something together around it. But I've been telling organizations I'm working with, pretend like it's 12 months and then start building like that, so that you are really catalyzed into, and I think it's one of the, I know it's one of the points in my book. It's called burn your ships. Burn your ships of any expectation of 3 months so that you can be developing something brand new based on us not going back. And always the end result is, if we do go back early, you're winning, because now you've got 2 options.
Indeed, but burning your ships. But what is burning your ship? Closing your company down and moving forward, leaving your job and starting something fresh.
Sure.
What does burning your ships mean in this particular scenario? Because it's a huge metaphor, and it's leaving everything behind and moving forward. And
yes.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think ultimately what burning your ships means is twofold. One, what was my expectations? Drop all your expectations, because those expectations have gone. All our futures have been canceled. That's another point in the book. And secondly, I think if you come down to the essence of it, what will your future consumer want? And your future consumer is not going to want what it wanted before. The future consumer is going to want a new type of service. We have to rethink how we are servicing our clients. How do we attract employees? Or do we go into a freelance model? So I think it's our own structure of our business that we need to rethink, because a lot of businesses that are failing are the ones with the deepest legacy of overhead costs and old ways of doing business. The ones that are nimble and flexible are the ones that are building their business on a decentralized process. So for me, it's 1, what does your consumer want in the future? 2, how are you positioning yourself as a business where you are able to be flexible and not stuck into legacy costs? So you could be servicing your clients the same type of service, but in a different way, in a new business model with different partners around you rather than big overheads.
Let me challenge you on that. I mean, you say the future is gone. Has it really gone, and has it really changed that much, or has it changed, let's say, 20%? Because obviously we haven't felt it yet. And I'm just wondering whether you're being too dramatic by saying the future's gone. Let's start all over again. Perhaps you can see in your telescope a little bit more than the others can. But can you please put some light on that?
Yes. So a lot of the things that I've been reading and watching is that this is not a recession, but a depression. And what a depression does, the long tail of it is much, much, much longer. And so for me, it's about understanding that the quicker you can start designing a business for that long tail, the better you're going to be off in the long run. The more you dilly-dally, bargaining that it could come back and it could be like it was, I think you yourself sit on the sidelines where other people are creating the Ubers, the Airbnbs, and the Pinterests. And remember that everything that has this sort of calamity that happens, a renaissance is born. And what I want to do is be dramatic so that people can be part of the renaissance. And when you do come back, you've just got a new version, a new way, a new approach, and a new focus that's much more in line with where we're going rather than where we've been. So yes, I am dramatic, but it's just there to catalyze energy into something new.
A recession is described as 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. And
Yes.
then that's a recession, and normally lasts 12, 18 months. In a depression, it's much longer, and then it lasts much longer.
10 years?
So,
I think it's 10 years, they say.
the last one was 10 years. The last one was 10 years, in the 1930s. And then we ended up with a war and all this kind of stuff. My question really is that, have we yet reached the depression stage, or are we able to avert the depression and stay within the recession mode, but be aware that if we are not careful over the next 6 months, next 2-3 quarters, then we might indeed fall into that depression. Because still, there are many things that are still being extrapolated and models are being run. And I am a little bit prudent on that, in the sense that recession, yes, potential depression, but not quite yet.
So look, I mean, again, I think this is a matter of perspective, and I don't discount your perspective. I think your perspective would actually suit me better because I could make money sooner. So I'd love to go with your perspective, but I've been listening to Ray Dalio. I've been listening to Professor Galloway, and I've been just watching economists speak and that sort of thing. And most of them, and there was an interview here with Rupert, the second wealthiest family in South Africa, and he put an interview out 2 days ago, and he said it looks like the economy will be shrinking between 10 and 15% over the next period. And so for me, it's like, ultimately, I want to prepare for the worst. That's just my personality. And I want to be able to get my companies that I work with and the companies that I have to prepare for the worst. And if anything happens, it's just an extra bonus if we go back a bit earlier. So yes, I think it's just approach. And again, I think it's depending whether you're focusing on that 3-month scenario or the 12-month scenario. I'm just the type of person who looks at 12-month scenario because that's where I feel comfortable. And if it goes back in 6 months, I'm going to be interviewing you, Tariq.
Indeed. And if you got it right, you'll be considered a genius, and if you get it wrong, you'll be considered a jerk.
I mean, isn't that
jerk?
Yeah, exactly. But I think, isn't that the thing, right? I mean, as somebody who lives in our world of trying to preempt and categorizing and contextualizing the future, everybody, I'm sure, have asked you as well, why didn't you preempt COVID-19? Like, where were you in that strategy session? And my answer to that is that I absolutely got one thing wrong. And it wasn't COVID-19. It was the speed at which the future of work is arriving. I didn't realize. I thought 2030 was when all this happens. But you can't deny that this has brought the future into our reality much quicker than we ever expected. But we knew these things were coming.
We pulled forward 2030 down to about 22, 23 or something like that.
Exactly. So I think that's what we need to focus on and say, okay, so if it's been brought forward by 8 years, what do we do now? And how do we pretend like we are decentralized, capable of being flexible, adaptable? Because those are the muscles that the future businesses need, not legacy and linear.
And we'd like to, let me look at your book first, and then I will go into the more deeper philosophical side. Changing mindsets and providing us a tool set. You've got change in mindset as one of the pillars, and then looking at some tools and methodologies to be able to do that. Can you quickly sort of summarize that for us?
Sure. So I decided, I was a third of the way through my 4th book. And like we were chatting offline, we thought nobody was listening, but some people were. It's become kind of irrelevant. And our sort of my work, I wouldn't say totally irrelevant, but kind of irrelevant. And so I decided to start writing a trilogy. And the reason I decided to make it a trilogy is because things are changing at such a rapid pace that I can't, and I don't think anybody can preempt what's going to come. So I thought to myself, well, how do I go about writing a trilogy that's current? And we're talking about hyper current right now because within weeks we are changing. So I wanted to bring out something that was as current as possible. So I decided that the first book I should write is about mindset, because the mindset, the emotional state, and the physical state that we have right now determines the quality of decisions we make. And so for me, that was the most important thing to do for myself. And then the second book is about how we come out and how we behave in a new economic system. And then the third book will be called Future Next, which will be about determining the trends that we need to be looking at that I believe will be important. But today we're talking about the mindset and the emotional state. And look, I myself, just like you, got a string of emails telling me that all my future work was canceled. And all of a sudden, that was it was a huge hit to my future memories, my future projections, the plans that I had. And I had to go through a process of mourning them, feeling bad for myself, being angry. And so I realized that everybody's going through this. And so I decided to write the framework that I followed to help other people.
So you went through the 5 stages of mourning already. You've
No,
been through the 5 stages of mourning already.
No, you know what's funny is I find myself toying between them still. Yesterday, I was kind of angry for a couple hours. And, maybe 3 days ago, I was watching a Spanish doctor and I was in tears.
Yeah.
And so I also find myself going through all 5 stages constantly, but ultimately arriving at radical acceptance so you can catalyze yourself into the future rather than being stuck.
Let's look at the old world, which focuses around capital, around talent, and about creating markets. That's how the economic structure is constructed. The new world, to me, is about social capital, about perhaps trust networks and trust chains, rather than just, and the value chains that are there are trust value chains and social value chains and sustainable value chains, as opposed to just the economic piece, which is going to be there anyway. And last is to have massive purposes, a transformative purpose, that we are purpose driven, and it's from within that we live in a more collaborative society. I know it sounds very, very Pollyannish and stuff like that. Every world is going to be amazing and beautiful and so on. But perhaps we can imagine that beautiful world. And if we can imagine it, perhaps we can achieve it.
Well, this is exactly what Future How is about. My next book is about how do we show up as a collective to build a world that's better for more people. I think the world that we've built, the capitalist model that we've followed, has allowed certain people to become incredibly wealthy and a lot of other people to not be as wealthy or very poor. And what actually is happening is that this capitalist model that we come from is sucking the oxygen out the tank. Because the more money you have, the less money is in the machine. That means less people can spend money, which means that you don't get that much richer. So what we have to do is prioritize people over money. And the more people have more money, the more machine keeps moving forward and upwards. So really, I think it's an opportunity for us to reimagine the possibility of a new economic situation. And because we must remember that the old economic situation was just stories upon stories that came from whispers and became fact. And so now all of a sudden we're like, well, now that's always how it's been. Well, truth is, no, it hasn't always been like that. We have just realized since the 1940s that this is the economic system that America put forward as the New World Order. But ultimately what it's done is improved humans' lives, but has also created a huge disparity, which I think now we have the opportunity to reset. Now remember, not that you would remember because you weren't there, but in the 14th century, the European Black Death, the thing that devastated half of Europe, was the end of feudalism and the beginning of the Italian Renaissance. And so we're seeing the same sort of scenario play out now, where we're seeing the death of one and the rise of new skills, new creativity that will be birthed out of this.
So this income disparity that we're talking about, like 50 to 100 families own about half of the world's wealth. In the US, it's exactly the same thing. The top 1% owning a almost very large number. I don't know the exact number, so I don't want to misquote. But the disparity is very, very much there. Is this going to crumble in some way? I mean, are we going to redefine a new middle class as a part of this process? And what's going to happen to the super rich dudes?
Look, I have no idea. I mean, I think the thing is I'd like us as a collective to reimagine the possibility of something that's different. And think back to the French Revolution, when there was that sort of concept of feudalism, where there was only the super wealthy and everybody else was poor. And what happened? There was a revolution. And so ultimately, we want to stay away from any revolution, but I think COVID-19 has given us a pause, a perspective, an objective viewpoint of things that were working and weren't working, and giving us an opportunity to realize that certain things were just rubbish, and we just bought into fake sort of concepts that were made themselves to be fact. So again, I believe that as a collective, we have more power now than we've ever had. And as a collective, we can reimagine and bring about a new way of living that really benefits everybody. And I think all of us want that. We are all really kind human beings. But the old economic system gave greed the thumbs up and reciprocity not really that much, which I think is not true, because I think as human beings, we are very kind and giving and generous.
So when we look at the future of capitalism, and Peter Diamandis, in one of his very famous speeches, talks about the end of capitalism as we know it, because we will have perfect information as we go forward. So anything and everything can be compared. So the opportunity for arbitrage is substantially reduced. The disparity, and now through this crisis, people will really actually suffer. So the numbness will go away. And the communist system sort of makes you numb. It produces, but it's sort of numb. But if that numbness goes away and there's perfect information, are we looking at a new type of capitalism, or should we throw the word capitalism out and call it, I don't know, a new democracy or something like that? I don't know. What would you call it? Or what would you see?
Look, the terms that I've seen are market capitalism, where market and the people within it are the priority rather than capital. And I've seen conscious capitalism. I've seen new capitalism. I've seen these terms because I think capitalism is great because it advances, but not at the cost of the planet, not at the cost of human life. And I think we've moved so far into consumer is king, or consumer centricity, which Amazon is the poster child for, but we need to move towards planet centricity. Because ultimately, how much money and how much convenience can you bring when there's no planet anymore? So we've got to be able to consciously make a better decision, become consumer activists in going for the fair deal, not the cheap deal. And so we've also become clear that we need less, but let's try and support things that are more fair in structure rather than the cheapest deal. And I think that we'll start seeing a falling away of those brands that were just about cheap. And we saw Forever 21, one of the fast fashion brands, go bankrupt just a few months ago. And so the concept of fast fashion was so cool 10 years ago. Now it's a swear word in many parts of the world. You know, it's like we're just creating too much havoc for throwaway fashion. And we'll see that in many other forms as well, as we start to see the rise of the feminine consciousness. What I think is the rise of the feminine consciousness, and Paul actually messaged me on WhatsApp, and I'd seen it, but the countries that are dealing best with this are the woman-led countries. And I think the sharing economy, the collaboration, the nurturing, the planet centricity is all based on the rise of the feminine consciousness and the quietening of the immature masculine consciousness that got us to this point.
That is indeed amazing how these the 6 women in Europe are actually doing way better. And I put that post forward on Facebook also. It is humanity, it's empathy and compassion, and competence. You start putting those 3 things together, and we have a future. Rather than the male archetype, which is about aggression and control and command and control structure. And those are the sort of things that I think we should learn from, and these are the beacons for us.
Well, I think both female and male have an opportunity to be immature and mature in their approach. So I wouldn't band it as male. I would band it as immature male, but you also have immature feminine traits as well. But now what we're seeing is the maturing of the balancing of masculine and feminine. And that's really where the renaissance of the human being arrives. And I see that as well as coming to the forefront, because as the more and more we mature, we realize we need less and less. We become much more conscious and much more collaborative because we tap into an endless stream of abundance and energy rather than being scarce and being everything on the IP and lock and hold, you know? So it is evolving. And I think this is a wonderful catalyst to it.
You know, nature has responded beautifully in some way. One of the positives that has come out of the COVID-19 crisis, that all the smog in Delhi has disappeared. In LA, you know, people can breathe, the birds have come back, the blossom are out there. And it just shows that literally within a month of giving relief to our planet, it regenerates itself. And perhaps that's the other, I would say common enemy, but common cause, which is climate, needs to be a global activity. And we find a way to embrace it rather than just make it political or about power and about control, and just basically say our planet has just responded. Like, folks, just look at this. Everything is so much nicer. And can we go back, or rather go forward into this a friendlier climate?
Look, I think I think the way we build social capital is changing right in front of our eyes. If you think back to the 80s, your social capital was built on a Ferrari and a gold Rolex. And we're starting to see that social capital is now built on being collaborative and standing up for people who don't have a voice. And the people that are doing that are now becoming the heroes of our society. And so we're starting to see the heroes change. And I think that's a wonderful thing, because, you know, the societal stories and memes are setting up new heroes that are prioritizing the right things.
Yeah. The other thing which I quietly observed initially, and it became more and more evident as time went by, is how interdependent globally we are. And something happens in one place, and 24 hours later, the whole world is embroiled in this particular issue. How do you see this interdependence playing forward? And I spoke about trust networks earlier. How do you see that evolving?
So good question. I mean, I posted something the other day about hyper collaboration, which is one of the trends we're expecting out of this. And Google and Apple have now combined forces to be able to track health of people around. And so what I find is that it's not so much what's happening on the other side of the world. Other side of the world doesn't matter anymore. We've almost become borderless. Because we're sitting in our homes and we are digitally connecting, it doesn't matter whether you're in Delhi, Dubai, Germany, or Virginia. It's irrelevant. So I think it's humanity's collaboration now becoming much easier and more fluid, based on our technology and our ability to connect, and not having to travel or get onto a plane. And I myself have been engaging with more people around the world than ever before. And I was traveling a lot beforehand. And I think just right now we have 102 people on here. I imagine they must be from 20 or 30 countries. So it really has become borderless. And so hyper collaboration and interdependency has become a fantastic result, or I think an unintended result, of us sitting in our lounges or in our homes connecting with people around the world.
Indeed. I think let's take some questions, because we have about 4 or 5 questions in now. The first one that you spoke about building a 12-month plan. How do you factor the people cost in this? I am talking for sales team and the process team and so on. So, I mean, in your mind, you're planning as if this thing is going to last 12 months. So what do? If you run a bank and you have 500 people there, do you go and fire 400 of them and say, off you go, because this is a new world?
So look, I mean, I have always suggested that you are running a parallel business to your current business, and one business is focused on the future. And it's really just about taking the resources from this business model and recalibrating them to a new business model, and then driving forward with that business model. Whether that means you have to let some people go, you know, that's just the advent of new things and disruption coming. So this was just fast-tracked your ability to want to redesign and recalibrate. So yes, do your people let go? Unfortunately, yes. Do they have an opportunity to retrain themselves? Absolutely. Can they become entrepreneurs? Without a doubt. So there are so many opportunities out there, and I don't think people need to need to become sad for the fact that they've lost their job. You can become an entrepreneur. You can retrain yourself. You can sell thought leadership in so many different ways. There's the internet out there, and all you have to do is get 0.001% of people to give you $1 a day, and you can live very, very well. So really, we need to see this as a new way to redefine. So yes, legacy structures will be dead and dying, and they were always dying, really. This is just fast tracking it. So yes, there is going to be some pain, but there's also a fantastic opportunity to retrain, redesign, and refocus on what value you could bring to the world.
We have another question from Dr. Nadine, and she says, well, what do you think is the most important asset a company preparing to shift needs to have? And how do you think that reflects on the workplace post-COVID-19? How do you think, what's the most important asset at this point in time?
What question are you trying to answer? Because I think what companies are doing is trying to do what they've always done in a new world. And I really urge people to redesign the question that they're trying to answer. Is like, what service am I actually bringing to people? And then design the team around that question. And that's the hardest thing to do. Because ultimately what we do is we get stuck in the old way of questions. And then what we do is become efficient in answering the old question. And we believe that's innovation. And it is. But ultimately with this sort of shift, for me, I'm asking my clients to ask brand new questions and design teams around those questions.
Yeah. You know, when I talk about Finance 4.0, the future of finance, basically, I go back to foundational principles of banking and finance. And principle number one is about storing value, storing money. Number two is transacting interaction. And number three is lending and credit. And if you have those foundational principles and you put a little packet around that, put it in the cloud and have it on your cell phone, you don't need a bank anymore.
Exactly.
So therefore, the question is different. It's not as if, what do I need to do with my bank? It's like, what are the future of banks going to look like, and what role am I going to play in that future? And to me, perhaps we should call this Finance 5.0 post-COVID.
Yeah.
Because I'm serious, and it could be Energy 5.0 and all of those things. In other words, we've just literally missed a generation, a decade, and moved to the next one. So is that how we need to start asking questions? Go back to foundational principles and ask a new question?
Yeah, I think first principles is a fantastic way. You know, first principles, what Elon Musk's use as well, and these foundational principles, because ultimately we get caught up in the operations and efficiency machine that our businesses are, trying to bring about more profits and trying to squeeze more people to do more sales, but we forget about the question. You know, and I'll give you a quick example. I worked with De Beers, who's a diamond business, and they asked me to come and tell them about the future of diamonds. But after some research, I realized the question shouldn't be what is the future of diamonds, but what is the future of luxury? Because they're a luxury brand. The fact that they do diamonds is only what they do, but why they exist is because of luxury. So by changing that question, it designs who you want in your teams to bring a service into the future. So really it's about engaging with futurists and strategists to redesign the question to bring about a decentralized business model that is still servicing your client, but in a brand new way.
I mean, talking about De Beers, diamonds are now being manufactured in California, very, very specifically. So manufacturing is happening. Number two is they create a scarcity, and the other thing is they create desire. They create an aspiration, and that's a
all of that.
Different marketing tool. Yeah.
But also, look, all of that is true. But remember that 20 to 30% of the human population right now are underpinned by a megatrend called guilt-free consumption. These are the veganomics. They wear normcore fashion. They ride bicycles. They're all over the Scandinavian countries. They're in East Coast America. They are a big portion of the human population. And as more and more people wake up, less and less people want diamonds. They just become like they're useless. It's a certain market that still perceives them in that market. So De Beers, my advice was keep going, doing that. But remember, there's this market over here that you're losing. And so what do you do and understand what's luxury for them? And that's redesigning your question.
Yeah. There's another question that came through, and that was, are we ready for this new post-COVID crisis? My question is, can we afford not to be?
I mean, that's the obvious question. It's like, please God, they're all ready. And the way you become ready is becoming flexible, adaptable, curious, optimistic, making sure that you're focused on opportunities rather than expectations from your past, and changing the way you make decisions based on where your heart is rather than where your logical mind is, because the future requires right brain, not left brain. So there's a lot of things that I also unpack in the book to create this adaptability and natural optimism.
As futurists, and I've learned a new word from you, and I will give you the credit, but we'll use it together, possibilists, as opposed to futurists, which is probably the next level up. So in that environment, we talk a lot about corporate immunity systems and personal immunity systems, not in the medical sense, but in the sense of habit, in the sense of structures that people are not ready to change. One of the classic ones is the healthcare sector. Healthcare globally is a $4 trillion industry. And I think this COVID reset can turn the industry upside down and absolutely take out the past, and in the future really rebuild from today, or rather not rebuild, build from today, something that's preventive and predictive in nature, using new technologies rather than curative in the process and the old ways to do this whole process. Because to build resilience, we need to do that. There will be another pandemic. There will be another crisis. So roll back all over the whole thing all over again. So we need to find a different way of doing it.
I worked with Netcare, who is the largest private medical hospital in South Africa and the UK. And what the CEO was said to me, well, I love these lines. He says, we're not in healthcare, we're in sick care. We need people to be sick in order for us to be profitable.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying right now is exactly what we did when we wanted to preempt any tsunamis or earthquakes. We put sensors into the earth to pick up on any early sort of signs of that. And that's exactly what's going to happen to us right now, is that we'll have these things embedded in us in order to be able to give the mass humanity the ability to be able to preempt any one of these things. And so for me, I'm all for it. Nanotechnology and how it would be incorporated into the way we report back on our health on a continuous basis so that we are able to keep everybody safe so we don't have a repetition of this.
Okay. Another big question related to the interdependence of the world. And the world has started becoming dependent, not interdependent, but dependent on China to become the manufacturer, basically the workshop of the world. And when this thing happens, suddenly everybody realized, every major corporation started realizing, like, oh my God, all our production comes from there, everything from medicines to ventilators to whatever we want. Do we need a reset in that? And there's a conversation going on that countries like Japan, Vietnam, and India take one piece out from there, and Mexico perhaps leading in Central America. I don't know in Africa, perhaps Nigeria and South Africa. How do you see that reset, and would this distribution start happening and we become less dependent on one country for our production?
Well, look, I think the reason China became the manufacturing hub of the world is because we prioritize cheap over anything else. And so if we have to redesign, moving away from shareholders to stakeholders as the new structure of the economy, where you prioritize employees, communities, consumers, and shareholders, it becomes obvious that your community must be manufacturing what you need. It's not a price situation. It's a community situation. And so it's just about prioritizing things differently. And the end result means that China doesn't have to be our manufacturing arm. And I've also seen that Japan is now paying all its existing companies manufacturing in China to bring all their manufacturing back home. I've seen France do the same now. So I think there'll be a hyper-localization again in prioritization of jobs in the local market, even though it's not the cheapest, but it'll actually bring about a buoyancy in the market that's been missing. One of the examples of this was Henry Ford, where he took the salaries of his workers from $2 or $1.80 to $5 a day. And the people said to him, are you mad? And he said, well, look, if my workers can't afford my cars, what's the point? And so it's really about that concept of us redevising economics so that we can not rely on somebody like China.
Let's take some more questions. Somebody from the banking and the financial industry talking about where customers to avoid borrowing and spending, how do we go about increasing and maintaining sales and continue the revenues? Clearly, the bricks and mortar model of door-to-door, face-to-face sales is in a lockdown won't work. Now, here's somebody, John, who's again looking at sales, looking at revenues, looking at exactly the same stuff. What advice do you have for this person? Like, dude, this is a reset.
Look, exactly. I think that's the whole point of what I said earlier is redesign your question. The question is still within the framework of where we came. And so this person, whoever it is, with much respect, and many people are still stuck in old ways of expectation. And these people are in the bargaining phase of how long this is going to take until we're back to normal. And so what I would be asking rather is how can I redesign my business model to service my clients with less costs so that I can add value and actually ask for less from my customers because I've got less costs. And so it's about redesigning the business model, not existing linear business models, trying to force fit them into a post-COVID world.
So the follow-on question from there would be, so how do we start retooling companies? Banks, financial institutions are there, but whether it's healthcare, how do we start retooling? Because over the last few days, I've been reading a lot of leading consulting firms who are coming out with their what's next and beautifully designed decks and stuff like that, all very incremental. And they're still having the same conversation, and they will make a ton of money when this thing ends, and they'll go back and try to fix everybody. What do we say there? I mean, what's the retooling process? What are the elements?
So good question.
Key questions they should ask.
Look, I think there's nothing wrong with those consultancies coming out with that, with your one parallel business model. My answer to that, and has always been, is about starting a new parallel business on the side of your business that's focusing on the new business models and the new consumer. So look, the incremental is important, but we also need disruptive. And what most businesses don't have is disruptive. So best example, the most famous one is Steve Jobs, where he went back to Apple. There was the Linda, which he hated. He took his top engineers and some new engineers, took them to Office Park opposite Apple, put a pirate flag on top of it, and they designed the Macintosh that disrupted the Linda. That's all we have to do, is set up parallel businesses. And so even myself, I've got parallel things on the go while I'm still doing these things, so that I can make sure that I've got both sort of targets covered.
Okay, so we've got many more questions coming through, and I'll start sharing more. Let's get closer to home in terms of travel. Both you and I, we love to travel. The travel industry, the hospitality industry is going to fundamentally change. I mean, of the 101 people who are still there, how many would go on a luxury cruise, 5-star today? Because that whole model is going to be seriously...
Tariq, you broke up there. You broke up there. Can you ask?
So I said,
Can you ask that question again? Sorry, I missed you.
Yes, certainly. I said, how many people in the travel industry now, because of the new environment, would go back and let's say we give you a presidential suite on one of the new Princess cruises in the Mediterranean? Who would take that, and at what price? In other words, travel industry is going to fundamentally change. What are your thoughts? And I'll give you some of my contributions.
You know, look, Tariq, I haven't given it much thought. I would have to dive deep into that sector to try and get my head around it, and I haven't. All I know is that I myself will be doing a lot more online. And so me being in there in the present flesh might not be necessary. One, because we want to keep costs low. And secondly, because I can still deliver in a new way based on online. So as far as travel is concerned, yes, I wouldn't take that cruise ship. I just won't, because I think if we are becoming more planet-centric, why would we go on to something that's incredibly not planet-centric? So my biggest carbon footprint, but ultimately need to do is prioritize the planet, and in that start designing travel plans around prioritizing planet centricity rather than anything else.
One of the things that's very likely to happen is just like we have an identity passport, we will have going forward a health passport. It could be a chip, it could be a Fitbit, it could be something inside our body, and we'll accept this level of surveillance and control. Where do you stand on total surveillance versus citizens, empowerment and independence? Because I think we understand the total surveillance in this environment, but how long and where does it stop?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we've been toying with privacy for the last 10 years or so as Facebook and Google have integrated themselves into our lives. And each and one of us and each and every one of us give up a whole lot of our privacy for the sake of convenience. And all of us are guilty. We might sit on the sidelines going, it's wrong, they shouldn't be doing that, but guess where we're doing it? On Facebook. So ultimately, the concept of privacy is changing. And slowly but surely, these things need to come into play in order for us to be able to keep safe the global family of humanity that we have. Now, can this get into the wrong hands? Absolutely. Has it got into the wrong hands? Absolutely. Can it get into the right hands? Yes, it can as well. Standards that we're able to monitor these things, but it's a very difficult and it's like a difficult situation and topic to talk about because people are scared about it. But ultimately, Facebook knows everything about you already. Health is just one more thing that they're going to know. But also think about it. Tariq, next time you go on a date, don't you want to know if she's got COVID or not? I mean, obviously you do. And she would want to know from you, besides anything else that's going on inside us. But that becomes part and parcel of the new way of us interacting. So yes, it is scary. Yes, we have to be cautious about it, but ultimately it's necessary so that we can keep everybody safe, because we can't have this happen again.
20 years ago, we had 9/11, 19 years ago, and the whole issue of terrorism in the world changed in terms of security. To me, it's that kind of a black swan event now, where because of the COVID issue, healthcare will change fundamentally. Now, most likely, travel costs will substantially increase. So the way we travel will almost certainly change, and why we travel will change, and so on. So I think this is a major, the whole hospitality industry is going to be redefined in many, many ways. And I think they have some amongst the biggest challenges. One of the questions that came through was that, you know, this is all fine and reinvent and go forward and doing all this blah, blah. I'm putting some editorial in there. That's right. And the person's question really was, there'll be mass unemployment, and there'll be loads of people, blue-collar workers and low-level workers, and normal, I mean, middle classes also.
Yes.
What do we do in the interim? How do we bridge this? It's all funky for you to say that and for us to have this intellectual conversation, but when it actually gets down to real stuff, what is there in this real world?
So let me answer this by turning the mirror around a little bit. The way we've been indoctrinated to live our lives has been to go to school, get a university degree, get a job, retire, and die. That's the fundamental thing that we need to be changing, because it's not about being employed. It's about finding ways to add value to the world by, one, utilizing your existing knowledge, two, maybe engaging with informal education where you educate yourself. I mean, Tariq, do you go to university to have all this knowledge? You don't. You are fascinated by it. You sit on your computer, you read all day. And I saw somebody else's question come in around poor people don't have it like this. I disagree fundamentally, because poor people right now have got more access to more information than ever before in history. We've got close to 5 billion people connected to the internet. And in any part of the world, I mean, just look at India. India's got free internet now for all the people in India. If you just go to any sort of coffee shop or cafe or something, you can sit outside and download it. So download any sort of information. So I think it's a prime time for us to take responsibility, no matter where you are in the value chain, to look at how you can upgrade yourself based on your curiosity to bring unique skill sets and unique impact to the world, whether it's in a small community or finding a tribe of people around the world. The internet is a tool set that we mustn't look at as just something to socialize on, but one, to educate ourselves differently, access new markets, add different types of value, and position ourselves as a thought leader in whatever field excites us. Now, you and I are very key examples of that, because we didn't go to university to study this. This is informal training that's positioned ourselves through our own fascination with this topic to be able to become somebody that earns money from it. So I lecture at universities. I never went to university. So again, the question is high unemployment. The question should be, how do all these people that find themselves out of a job that used to be the Industrial Revolution process, how do we redefine reskilling ourselves to add new value to the world?
Yes, indeed. I mean, one of the remarks that came through was that we need 6 million more nurses and doctors, and you know, they are the absolute heroes and heroines of today, because you know, and we have not been respecting our teachers and our nurses for the last few decades, and keeping them at the lower end of our society, even though they deliver such an important service to humanity. So you talk about the right brain stuff, and I do too. So compassion and empathy and love and connection and all of those things. This is what the future jobs are going to look like, perhaps. 6 million nurses, 10 million counselors. We'll all need counselors because we will be unemployed. So somebody's got to be there to look after us. Is that the massive new area that we need to explore to be able to develop? So I asked the question to John, which is more rhetorical than actual, and basically what I felt that we need to find a way to get those right side brain jobs to actually engage with us and to get ourselves sorted out. Back, I have got an extra screen for some reason. I don't know who the hell that is.
It's me, but the old me. This is the
It's
new
your
me.
you. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You transformed into the new you. So you were just trying to demonstrate how this transformation process actually works.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
metamorphosed from a big black box to a real person. So there you go.
There we go. There we go.
Now,
Right.
I think we've got about 10 minutes to go, John, and I
Mm.
think we've discussed a plethora of issues right across the board. I think we need to start getting back to, to the real stuff, which affects all of us. How genuinely do we work our way through this process? What are the practical things that we need to do? I know, and please don't give me platitudes that we have to be creative and resourceful and resilient and agile. We know all of that, but practically on 1st of
Yeah,
July,
sure.
we go back to work.
Yeah.
What do we need to do? How do we need to build ourselves and get ready for this stuff?
Okay, so I think that we've got to realize that the energy we bring to any situation determines how we engage with that situation. And for me, the very practical tools of getting myself ready for the day is all I can speak about. And so in my book, I write about the fact that your state is who you are. And we have 3 states as human beings. We have an emotional state, a mental state, and a physical state. And I really go down to the nitty-gritty of making sure that my emotional state is in a good place. Because if you had to wake up in the morning and you have a little niggle of an anxiousness, that becomes a monster by 11 a.m. and a huge crazy world by 3 p.m. And so we've got to realize that we have to manage our states as human beings. So no matter whether you're going back to work, you've lost your job, you're creating a new employment, or you're creating a new business model, or you're an entrepreneur, ultimately, you're the person you need to be looking after. So what I do is I meditate every morning and every evening. I journal every morning and every evening. In a mental state, I give myself 3 sections to look at. What am I learning? What am I growing? Where am I growing? And when am I chilling? And ultimately, I come down to my physical state where I exercise twice a day for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the afternoon. And so no matter where you're going on the 1st of July, 1st of August, if your sleep isn't right, you're just not going to be able to come at it from the best place possible. So I can't get more granular than that and to say, look, your responsibility is to make sure that your state, your perspective, and your projection are based on a settled emotional, mental, and physical state.
John, we're coming towards the end of the session. We've been talking for almost an hour, and we've gone down to 99 from 101. So only 2 people passed out. Couldn't handle this.
Passed out, okay.
Probably did, because this is indeed something that is, I would say, scary for a lot of people, because we need to build ourselves into this process. So any final words, any final thoughts that you'd like to share, then I can do the wrap up.
The one thing I like to always end off with is, as human beings, we're made up of memories. These memories either energize you or make you feel bad. Get down to fixing your memories that make you feel bad. Become conscious of them, aware of them, and thank them. This releases you of patterns that have got you caught up in a world that you don't like. Once you release them, you've got a clean, brand new slate to recreate your future from. And the irony of the best way to prepare for your future is to heal your past. That by far is the biggest thing that has happened for me, where I've forgiven people from my past and situations, giving them a new opportunity to recreate. And there's never been a better opportunity for us to take this pause, take this time to reevaluate our memories and choose the ones that serve us best and focus on those.
Super. My final comment really is that I'd like to firstly, obviously, thank you for all of the the conversations that we've had up to now. But really whoops, where are we going? Let's close the chat so that, okay. And my final thoughts are that I think these are very testing times, but we need to find the good within this and to take it forward. So that's number 1. Building social capital, trust networks, and everything around that, I think, is a fundamental way forward, because if countries won't trust each other, there will be no travel. If countries don't share information, there won't be any healthcare data that is being shared. All of these things are based in trust. Now, whether we use blockchain or whatever to have that distributed form of trust, That is something we can explore. But we need to build those trust value chains and trust networks and social value chains and the networks. The third one, which you alluded to a lot, and I'm glad you did, is really looking after our planet. And this has become so clear during this phase that we need to look after our planet, because there will be future pandemics. And what do we need to do to respond to them faster? How do we contain them? Where are we looking? Where are we going in this process? The next one is trust in terms of companies. Now, I know Google and Apple are collaborating, and Philips has come in, and various other people. If we have the collective consciousness and the collective intelligence and the collective, the whole intellectual power that we've got together, perhaps we need the Bretton Woods of the future. We had the First World War and it ended with United Nations and World Bank and all the others. They were designed 75 years ago for a problem for 75 years. My view is that today we need to set up our new set of institutions that we all trust, that we all relate to, that we all connect to, because it's to have I don't know, the United Nations of artificial intelligence, or the UN of managing, not GDPR. GDPR is just something that you have on a box and you tick, but something real. So these are new rules, new thoughts, new ideas. My last note, and the best thing I can say here, that this too shall pass. We have seen many things that have happened like this in the past centuries. The Spanish flu took 50 million lives, and it was one absolutely devastating in 1918, 1919. I dare say, and hopefully nothing like that will happen to us. So we have a lot to look forward to once this thing is over. But the reset that we have, folks, this is the most amazing opportunity to reset and reinvent ourselves into an amazing future. And that is what and we started with the metamorphosis, but we'll end with that. That is what a butterfly looks like. When a butterfly starts out, it doesn't want to end as a caterpillar. It comes out as a beautiful butterfly. And I think this crisis can potentially make us into these new butterflies if we go and we can create the butterfly effect right from here, John, and go on into the future. There we go. That could be a new thing, a new butterfly effect. So yeah, there you go. That's a new thing. So here's the butterfly effect starting to help the future and bring about amazing new things into the future. And God bless everybody who's there. Please be safe, be careful, be happy, and we're all there. Reach out if there's anything we can do ever to give you advice and support. And our system, I mean, we are there. I mean, we are so easy to contact, whether it's on Zoom or others. And I dare say, John, you'll respond to in the same way as I. And it's time now, really, to talk and support each other and build our global network and our global consciousness. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Ciao.
Cheers. Bye.